Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rey Lira, and welcome to today's Ergonauts Mission Control, presented by myself and Miss Melissa. And Larry will be giving introductions about themselves here in a sec. And we also have panelists, Mr. Christmas Murphy, Albert Moore, Dr. Peggy, and Nicole Case and Steve Davis will be our panelists today, and they'll be asking questions to our presenters throughout the presentation. And if you're an attendee, feel free to put any questions in the chat, and I'll be able to answer those, or I'll be able to ask them to the presenters as quickly as I can, and we'll get those answered for you. Once again, thank you for everyone for joining us, and we will be sharing this on our YouTube page and getting this out to hundreds of other people to view this at a later time. Just for our rules of engagement for today, everyone just please be respectful of each other's time. And when someone's speaking, obviously jump in. And whenever one person is asking a question, we'll try to get to all the questions as quickly as we can. So again, just be respectful of everyone here today. And again, thank you so much to Melissa and Larry. And I will give the floor to you guys, and I'll stop sharing, Larry.
All right, let me.
And whenever you present yourself, if you could tell us where you guys are from and just a little bit more about you.
Sure. All right. Everybody see the full screen? We all good? Excellent. Excellent. Well, yeah, welcome everyone. It looks like we have a good board of panelists, and we have a few participants out there as well. So I'm glad to see folks kind of signing in on a fun topic, at least for myself, but and Melissa, and so we'll take everybody through this, and obviously we're recording too. So ask your questions. I like that it's a little bit more intimate, so we can take a little bit of time to answer people's questions as we go through. Just as a quick introduction, I was trying to think, Melissa, you and I met. I think when I met Melissa at the bar, it was my line about how I was forklift certified that really piqued her curiosity. But no, we've worked together for many years. And we did a lot of work in healthcare, which a lot of the actuarial information becomes very important when you're looking at large numbers, development, those types of things. But I'll share some of those stories as we go through to my work with different actuaries as a safety professional and a risk professional, and how that understanding these numbers became very important to success and growth. As I think, as a risk and safety professional, your understanding of this information is important. I'm with Holmes Murphy, and I'm a risk management safety consultant with Holmes Murphy. Have probably been in the industry, I think, now about 25 years. Also a retired active reserve Sergeant Major, and so have done quite a bit of leadership on large levels, and use some of these same techniques even in managing I think 11,000 people at one point in time. So, how you kind of manage all of that and keep track. So I'll let Melissa kind of talk about herself for just a second.
All right. Thanks, Larry. I'm Melissa Huenefeldt. I am a consulting actuary for Milliman, which is an actuarial firm providing actuarial services to all sorts of clients, organizations with large deductibles, self-insured retentions, captives. And one of the things that when Larry and I started coming up with the idea, we wrote a paper together, and now we've adapted that to a presentation, is that safety and actuaries don't really mix a lot. And so we thought it'd be good to demonstrate why it's important for the two to interact. I'm a fellow of the Casualty Actuarial Society, a member of the American Academy of Actuaries, and I have my associate in risk management. Larry and I both live in Kansas City, the home of the Super Bowl champions, and I'm really looking forward to talking some actuarial science to you guys today.
Awesome.
All right, excellent. So as a kind of added bonus or treat for everybody who's watching, who has to do these types of presentations, whether it's in a classroom or in this type of setting, I wanted to introduce this product, which I thought is pretty useful in getting interaction. So if you have your phone with you, you can just hold up your camera to this QR code. If it's an Apple phone, I've noticed they've added a new thing where the little QR button comes in the bottom right corner and you click on it and it asks if you want to open in Safari. And that'll take you out to the Slido presentation. And so it should just open where it has Q&A and you can type questions in there and, we can all see them. It is anonymous. But then as we go through, we've added a couple of fun polls just to engage everyone in the process as we go through. So like I was telling the panelists earlier, it's a pretty inexpensive product for you if you're a teacher. So certainly recommend checking it out. It's pretty easy to use and it can always add to your presentations. All right, so we did our introductions and talked about what we're going to go do there, and then looking at different types of losses that we all might look at. And you might get your losses from a lot of different places. You could, oftentimes they're going to come from an insurance carrier. They might come from your own risk management information system. And then you also could look at them from your OSHA log as well. So any of those things might be places that you're looking at incidents that have occurred. And so you would have both the incident and then you would have the cost of the incident. So we'll kind of talk about that. And, as safety professionals, a lot of times we will start with the OSHA logs might be the first place or the first thing that we have access to. But as we build and grow in our careers and what we're doing and the people we interact with, it's important to understand some of those other areas. Unless anything you want to add from an intro standpoint?
No, so we've defined, or we'll define, three different types of losses that were shown on that previous slide, and they all have their place and their purpose, and hopefully that'll be part of what you get out of this conversation.
Okay, so how does everyone feel about math and safety? I see some of our previous practice answers are in here too. So I'd love to, everybody give me your, should math and safety be the same or should they be integrated? And yeah, just go ahead and type in your comment. You should see that on your phone that it came up and it allowed you to type in the comment. I see we got one response. Less stats. Very nice. Very nice. So just kind of a fun question to open up, get everybody engaged in the Slido, hand in hand. All right, good. So I see that a lot of folks joining. We may not have to do any convincing here, Melissa, in terms of convincing folks that math and safety go together. So that's good. We're already on a good start. I'm glad to see that. If anybody told me ain't no math do no good, no how, I would be a little worried. We'd have to we'd have to do a little work. So we talk about the Wild West of data and information, and just kind of in the intro, we gave that that sense that there's a lot of different places that you can get this information from. And what's weird is you can get similar but differing information from your carrier, then from your broker, and then your actuary. So they could all take the same numbers and all give you something different. And so if you're not sure what they're giving you, at least maybe by the end of this, you can start asking the right questions. Like, what kind of data did you give me? So you would understand what you're looking at, because just that in and of itself, and I find even in our own teams, we don't always explain to each other what data we're looking at and what it means. So and I think I like Melissa's quote. Incomplete data can be misleading, and then data in isolation is also misleading. And we'll get into that a little bit, I think, with some of our commentary here. Melissa, anything else, from a Wild West standpoint?
Well, when I think of that, I don't know if anybody's seen that new commercial from Salesforce of Matthew McConaughey out there in the Wild West, and he says, "Is data the new gold?" And I always laugh because I thought data was always the gold. And there's so much power when it comes to data, as long as you understand what you are looking at and making sure that you're fully informed of what's going on, so that you're not jumping to conclusions that may cost a lot of money or drive a lot of action that may not be necessary.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's a lot of organizations that sell data, and of course with our advanced in AI and other communication systems, there's a lot of data. But is it decisionable? Might be the word, right? Is it could I actually make a decision or a well-reasoned decision based on this data, or is it just information? And it's like if you Google anything, I don't know if anybody's ever noticed, but like as Google has been around, right? Now you get 25,000 hits. So I sometimes my job is just being the Google master for people to explain, okay, this one's the good one out of the 25,000 bits of information. So let's talk a little bit about these different pieces of data or data. Currently valued losses. So I've got a visual here, and I'm going to go to the Slido question, but I want you to take a look at the visual real quick. And so we've got, and this will be the same data throughout that we use, but we're looking at this data in these last 3 years. If we look in these last 3-4 years, how are we doing? How are things trending, and what does this data tell us? And so we'll go. I've got a couple questions in there in the Slido for you to answer. That's funny. Well, we got okay. I was gonna say we're trending. I like that cheese with the taco was up there, right, with everything else for a second. Okay, so I don't know. Okay, that's good. I mean, it's okay. We've got some smarts out there who kind of looking at it. I'm not sure. So when we look at that information, when we look at that information, and I think you go first, don't you, Melissa? You want to take it for a second?
Yeah. So I'll start by defining what we mean by currently valued data. I don't think it was a very fair exercise to throw two charts at you and be like, "Hey, how we doing?" So when we're talking about currently valued loss data, as this says, it's set as a point in time. So if you were to go to your carrier or your third party administrator, or your internal RMIS and say, "I want losses valued as of December 31st, 2023, all the losses would be reflected as of what has happened up to that point. So that doesn't mean that it includes all the losses that have happened as of that date, especially for some lines of business. And I work a lot on workers' compensation. Workers' compensation is super long tailed. So there is a potential for losses to happen, but not be reported for 2, 3, 4 years later. Additionally, there may be some development that happens on those losses. So when we look at loss data or loss run as a point in time, we're looking at the status as of that date, whether it's open or closed. We're looking at what has been paid out on that date to the claimant. We're looking at what the claim handler has set aside as what they believe is going to be the case reserves for that claim. We're looking at everything as of that date. So then we run into a little bit of things that is kind of misleading, because you're looking at, say, a policy year. The most recent policy year may be 12 months from inception, or maybe 12 months old, 1 year old. The year before that is going to be 24 months old or 2 years old. And so when you start looking at that data, you're now looking at inconsistent time periods or inconsistent ages. And so you can't make those year over year comparisons because you're you're not comparing apples to apples. And so when we threw those graphs at you, maybe we were being pretty unfair because we obviously know what we were going to say about this. But when you're looking at those graphs and you saw those vast improvements, because this is currently valued data, it's data valued as of that point in time. We may tend to see those types of artificial improvements just because it is inconsistent ages. 1 year is older than the next, is older than the next. So, Larry, what do you have from a safety perspective?
Let's see what my next slide says here. Okay, so think about this, right? I mean, from a loss prevention, safety person standpoint, I'm going to annotate a little bit. Let's see if I can get my pencil to draw. You look at this and you go, wow, we are trending awesome. Look at that. Oh, and look right here. We are rocking and rolling. And so I take that to my bosses and just talk about how awesome I'm doing. Look at the great job. I am rocking and rolling it, right? And of course, we kind of pride ourselves on being honest to what's really going on with, the board and the C-suite and the people we report to. And the reality is there's a whole bunch of invisible information that exists in this space and right here. And so what I'm saying when I value this as of 2019, say, and today is, December 31st of 2019, and that's the day I value this information on right here. Well, what it doesn't take into account for is, have you ever had anybody stub a toe? Look like it's going to be a $500 claim and it turns into a $100,000 claim, right? It doesn't account for all that growth. And, Melissa and I see that. I mean, in insurance, I would say 4 years is a typical growth period for some of those weird claims. One of the things, here we've got the claim count on this side, and here we've got the cost, and you see the cost is the most dramatic, right? That's where we most dramatically go down. We just don't know what's going to happen there. And that's where we get into, if we talk medical terms, things like comorbidities, right? Well, he stubbed his toe, but he has diabetes and he has congestive heart failure, and he's going to need 6 months of hospitalization, and, we just don't know that. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times I'll even, and Melissa would probably put me in a headlock and at least give me a noogie for saying this, but I kind of use a little what I call a swag, where I say, hey, if we look at that most recent year, 2019, at least double it. By the time it's done, I could at least double that amount that's going to come out. Now, Melissa gets paid to actually apply real numbers to that and tell us where it's going, and she'll talk about that as we go through. But just understanding that as a risk professional, as a loss professional, that's a lot of space you don't even have control over, right? I did all the prevention I possibly could. This person still stubbed their toe, and now I don't have as much control over where that goes. I can do some things like return to work and I can manage them, but hard to control everything. Peggy's got I see a hand up, Peggy. Go ahead.
Yeah, I got to do this, So a long time ago in a land very, very far away, I used to look at this stuff and I would say, I want a comparison between lost work time and medical claims only. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, if you started to get rid of that low-hanging fruit with the medical claims, like a retrospective study on eye injuries that you sent to the hospital but wasn't lost time, and then you put them in safety glasses, oh my gosh, down the road you've saved about 3 or 4 eyes from being gouged out by freight,
Right.
So I always look at it more holistically, other than just lost time. but this is your example. That would be something I'd use as an example.
Oh, right. Well, we can certainly get into more detail of Heinrich pyramids and things of that. I think when I first look at something, to see how we're performing, I just kind of look at those lost time year over year. So maybe my overall frequency is going down, like in this graph here, but my lost time frequency remains the same. Then we could assume with an 8 to 12% increase in medical cost every year, my costs will go up by 8 to 12% just by keeping
Perfect. Yep.
lost time the same. So, if you have to focus, right, and we're all trying to prioritize, then sometimes that what's causing and driving lost time claims is a great, way to prioritize. Plus, I feel that lost time claims on your OSHA log are ones that float over into your work comp, because that's where you see that indemnity as the word we use. So lost time and indemnity are somewhat synonymous in the sense that that's where all your cost comes from. The story I used is where my uncle Wild Bill was a rodeo bull rider, and it always made me think of the rodeo clowns, where every lost time claim is another bull that you've loaded into the chute. And then we say go, and you're the rodeo clown out there trying to manage all of these claims and these things coming at you. So obviously the more of them you have, the more chance you have of something maybe not going right, because you're just trying to manage a lot at that point. So let me stop the annotation here. Want to clear all of that real quick. All right, and then we'll stop the annotation and go to the next one. All right, so we've got a little Q&A pause in here, and I think that was good. We kind of Peggy got the discussion going. But so from a starting standpoint, from the panelists or out there in the chat or QA session, any thoughts or questions? Okay, this is data that you would normally get from your insurance carrier. Typically is going to come to you in a currently valued statement. And so you just say, hey, run me a loss run, and then they're going to send you this. And of that day that you ask, they're going to send you a loss run of here's the cost of everything up till now. Any thoughts or questions from the group? So, your big takeaway there is obviously just be careful, because that loss run does not have that growth in it. So you're celebrating your success prematurely. It's hey, we're awesome, and going to your boss for a big raise, and then next year suddenly, well, it costs a lot more than you thought it would.
Yeah, Larry, you and Melissa make some really good points here. Here's a couple of just quick takes. One, actuaries don't use swag. Are you kidding, Larry?
No,
The only
they would not
swag in
use
an
swag.
actuary's mind is what they pick up in a bag at a conference, and that's as
That's
far
why
as
she
it
put me
goes.
in a headlock.
So I'm totally with you, and I know where you're going to go with the rest of the story. As you go on with this presentation, these numbers get a little bit harder to get and to calculate, but it doesn't mean that currently valued loss data should be forever forgotten about, because directionally it can tell you some pretty good things. I think it should just come with a caution sign, and I think you've reiterated that just now.
Yeah, I agree with that, Chris, because if you look at the oldest years and those are more developed, we have a better idea of how those claims are going to come out. You might get a better understanding of what the severity is for a back claim or what the severity is for a strain, and then that can help you understand the potential savings if you were to implement a safety initiative that may cause a reduction or a mitigation of those risks. And so yeah, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I mean, there's still value in it, and obviously, as an actuary, I need that information in order to do my analysis. But I think this is just the cautionary tale of, if you're trying to compare year over year and you get excited about the results, you might not be as excited next year when you do the same exercise.
Yeah, I had a comment. This is Albert. It looks like when you see a graph like that with the bar graph, I kind of expected to see some type of error bars around these things or confidence intervals that would alert me and other decision makers to say, hey, this is incomplete. You drew some circles and things on there saying that there's data that's missing, but did the reports typically tell me what is missing? And based on your calculations and your stats and everything that you've been modeling with this company, what's going to happen? And what's the most likely thing? Is this what you're showing me is the median value, or is this a low ball figure, or what?
And so it's completely raw data. So we receive the loss run from the carrier or the TPA and just throw it in a graph as is. And so that's where the discrepancy comes from, is just looking at that data uninformed. We don't know where things are going to end up. And that's luckily my job security is trying to determine that. But it's one of the things that you want to be careful of, and I've written a paper about data analysis pitfalls that you could fall into, is understanding what's being shown. I have seen reports from carriers that shall not be named that will have a graph that uses currently valued data on it, and it doesn't specify. It just says valued as of 12/31/23. And so unless you're informed and oh gosh, all of these years are valued as of the same date, that means that we can't compare year over year. But when you get that report from a carrier or a TPA, you feel confident that they're giving you information that's going to be helpful. And so that's part of the moral of the story is read the axes titles and understand what the data is saying. But I agree, Albert, like something that would indicate that the story's not over yet would be helpful, just so that you can get a better picture of, okay, when things are, everything's done, and we'll get to the developed losses. We'll get to my part after a bit. But yeah, once you understand that things are still going, then that helps you get a better picture of what's going on.
No, Albert, I love your question. I think it's perfect for this, because that's exactly what Melissa and I kind of want to talk about is, I think as you go out in the business world or you're interacting with these different agencies, the assumption would be you would get all the information you needed to make a good decision, but that's not always the case, because quite frequently the people who are delivering the data to you don't understand this either. And so they're just giving you what they have, and they're like, hey, good to go. And then, so if you at least have these questions in the back of your mind to say, okay, are there any parameters? Is there any growth? Is there, you can ask some of these other questions. You can kind of force them to go back and give you more information about the data. But quite often those charts that Melissa put together, that's what you get. And I've been in those meetings too, where somebody of my own ilk has said, hey, look how great we're doing. I felt very uncomfortable. I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to correct you in the meeting, but I'm going to talk to you afterwards, because we're maybe not doing great, right? So we had twice as many lost time claims. I'm still waiting to see where those go. So I think that's a perfect question, Albert, and I hope this is informative to everybody along those lines to be asking those questions. And statistics was probably one of my favorite classes in college, and understanding how easily it is to manipulate statistics to tell whatever story you want to tell. Even just by playing around with the graph. So, excellent question. Steve, did you have a question?
Isn't that a Mark Twain quote? Something like, there are lies, damn lies, and statistics. I think I remember reading that.
I believe so.
Sorry, Steve. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I didn't have, mine's not about statistics. Mine's about I worked, yeah, I was working on a project, and it's actually kind of falls into what Larry was saying. We had as a blue collar career person working in a crate shop, worked there for years. Same thing, steps on a nail, which is no big deal, right? Well, as a diabetic and 3 amputations later, over
Yeah.
a year and a half, that first aid, turns into, they're buying him out the rest of his career. The other thing that I got called on the carpet for once is we had done an intervention with a group of people that had I think they had 4 carpal tunnel releases per year. If you look at that, so we went in, we did education, we did a couple of other things, early reporting. And so my boss calls me in at the end of the year, and he goes, "Well, you got 23 first reports. I bet you're real proud of that." And I go, like, the severity index is completely gone. You got 3. So we were able to jump in, but he was looking at the data going, dang, this is what have we got you here for? And
Yeah.
so,
Look how many more we have, right?
yeah. Oh, yeah. Now,
No, Steve, that's a great. I do talk to people about that whenever they tell me they're going to introduce an ergonomics program. Is I always say, well, prepare your boss that the count will go up.
Yeah.
But our intent is to get the cost to go down.
Right.
Because if we get in there early, we can keep the costs down. But yeah, usually there's an initial panic, like, what is going on?
Right.
You've told everybody to report claims. What are you doing? So let's move on to the next section. I'm sure there'll be some more fun questions here. So great panel. Awesome discussion, everybody. I appreciate it. So we'll talk to green losses, and and so we're going to ask that same question again when we look at same data charts. And we're going to ask that same question: how are we doing? And we'll kind of go into that. Let's see if we get the questions that come up here. Is it gonna help me, or is it gonna crash on me? I just had to do an update before we started, so it may not be happy right now.
Well, then, any thoughts from our panel about what you see here? Is there anything that your first instinct would be?
Maybe put the charts back up.
When we look at those, I mean, so we can see the green to green with the same data tells us a little bit different story.
Same data. So all the graphs we're presenting, it's the same data, just different manipulations of the data.
Let's talk
Well,
about
if I
it.
remember
Well,
the last time we were going down, Larry was super proud that things were going down, but now the trend is reversed at the same end of the chart. So I'm starting not to trust my safety guy Larry so much. So you're gonna have to explain yourself, as they would say.
You shouldn't. Well, yeah, I mean, so everybody can see that, right? Same data going in a different direction. We just asked that question for green to green. So Melissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about what that means in actuarial terms?
Sure. So for this exercise, and I don't know if you read the axis, but all of the information was valued as of 12 months from inception. So it's valued as of the expiration of the policy year. And what that allows us to do now is we can make those year-over-year comparisons because everything is valued as of the same age. So we can look at, the latest year and compare it to the year before it or the year before that. And it's helpful if we know that there has been a change in, in some factor that could have an impact on the losses, so that we can say, oh, now we can look at this improvement and see that things have actually been changing. Now, I'll get a little actuarially nerding out here, but we use them to build loss development triangles. So if you're not familiar with a loss development triangle, it is a configuration of losses that are in a triangle format. If you've looked in an actuarial report, you've probably seen them. They have down the column is the policy year or the calendar year or some date to organize the data, and across the top are ages: 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, so on and so forth. And so that the way that the data is organized is everything in that 12-month column is 12 months from inception. So the data that was on the graph that we saw, all of that would be in that first column. The second column is everything valued 24 months from inception, and so on and so forth. And so now we're able to look at age over age comparisons to get an idea if things are, how those ratios look. So if you have losses at 12 months from inception, what growth do we expect at 24 months and on out? Now, we're not really interested in what happens between 12 and 24 months usually. What we're interested in is what happens between 12 months and the end of time, or what we call ultimate. And so we use these factors, we make these selections, and we look at how the data is looking, whether there's a trend or it's volatile, or we just take some inventory of what we see, and then we accumulate these factors to come up with age to ultimate factors. And you may have heard of loss development factors, LDFs. That's what we use in order to perform some of our actuarial analysis. But green to green data is used a lot in our reports in that function. Now, one pitfall of green to green data is, to contrary of what we said about the currently valued data, you can no longer look at it and get an idea of the severity of a certain kind of claim. It's going to be the severity as of 12 months. And so there's a lot of development, especially in the more severe claims, that could still happen. And so we really can't get much information about that component, but we have a better idea of improvements in our own experience.
And I like Melissa, I like green to green from a safety and risk management standpoint. Steve, you talked about implementing an ergo program, right? And looking at because what I talked about that idea of the rodeo and then the shoot roosters. The shoot rooster, I don't know if anybody's ever heard that term before. The shoot rooster is the person that sits there on the rails and tells you how to do things, but doesn't ever actually get on the bull.
Right.
That's a shoot rooster. So next time you run into somebody who's kind of telling you how to do it, you can call them a shoot rooster. But when we look at that, green to green, what it tells us is, me as a person, as a risk management loss prevention person, where I'm on the ground doing the work that I do with people on a day-to-day basis, I can kind of look at that and tell, did I end up at the end of each year in a better place than I did the year before? So how many bulls did I end up loading in the chute? So if I reduce the number of lost time claims, if I reduce the frequency at the end of each year, to me, it's a guide point. I mean, we still may have development on cost. We still may have another claim or two, but typically with work comp, I don't see a lot more claims pop in there. But I see growth on the cost of the claim itself. But as a mental check for a loss prevention person, kind of, if I looked at the end of every year and said, how am I doing? That can give me a better trend thought about, okay, I'm actually seeing improvement. We had less people hurt. We had less injuries reported. We did a focus on eyeglasses like Peggy talked about, and so I saw less injuries, eye injuries come into play. But kind of getting that date and time and saying every 12 months, how did I look? Because when we add in the if we're doing currently valued, it's missing the last couple of years, may not be accurate. If I'm and it's certainly in my cost data. Because again, when I look at a loss prevention person, I may have minimal effect on reducing cost once a claim occurs. My job, initially and in most parts, is to just prevent it from happening at all. So once it gets into the system, then we start talking about our partnerships with HR and return to work and all of those things to manage it. Steve, you might be managing the Ergo return to work program, right? We're going to redesign this job station so we can get them back to work. But initially, I would rather just not have the claim. So that's where I like a green to green look, just to kind of understand how I was doing at the end of each year. And is that getting better? And we'll talk about some other information you can add into a green to green look to give you even more insightful information. But we kind of wanted to give you this first. So any questions from the panel? Thoughts?
So I liked how you talked about your apples to apples. So that to me speaks to the idea of normalization, that you're trying to put things on the same basis, and you're doing it by year to year and things like that. But when you look across multiple years, I would wonder, how are you accounting for the time value of money, especially now in a higher inflation rate, that the numbers 3 years ago are going to be very different than maybe 3 years from now? You need to make an adjustment for that.
Yeah, so you're correct. There is no adjustment, or I should say explicit adjustment, accounting in that. And that is something we're facing as actuaries because of the inflation, economic and social inflation that we've seen, especially recently. And that's where actuarial judgment comes into play. And some of that is, how much can we trust the older years, knowing that the more recent years might be more indicative of what we would expect. When we're looking at just the year over year graphs that we had, it could be misleading. You could still see increases, and and still think, oh gosh, we've done everything we can, and it's still not good enough. But once you consider that, and then maybe it's a matter of separating out med only and indemnity, and seeing how what sort of impact there is to looking at those separately. But you're absolutely correct, Albert. There is no adjustment that is being considered for that. We also can take a look at benchmarks. Not that benchmarks are necessarily the greatest thing, because there are no two companies that are alike. But if we're seeing the same kind of growth in a benchmark that we're seeing in our own data, that would indicate that maybe things are looking as we would expect them to look.
No, excellent question. I like your apples to apples question too. I mean, in normalization of the data, and we'll go into that even a little bit more. Some other things you can add to normalize your data as well. Steve, quick question.
Yeah, you know what? I get this question all the time, and I don't know the answer. Most people say, well, if I do this and it goes down, and it maybe you're probably going to cover it, but what's the thing that affects your experience rating? What's the thing that is going to drive everybody smiles? So
don't get Larry started on EMODs.
Do you want to do like an extra hour? And then I'll get you about 50% of the way there. That thing's a mind melter. But it does include everything we're talking about, like Melissa's developed losses, anticipating you as an organization in the state you're operating in, and your benchmark and what you should be doing. And then there's little tiny rules in there about, it was at a lost time claim versus a meta only claim, and that counts different percentages. Normally when they try to tell you that an incident by itself shouldn't really impact your EMOD because it's more about frequency. But I can tell you that as small organizations, incidents that grow really big do affect your EMOD. When if you're a very large organization, a couple extra incidents one way or the other may not have much of an impact. But if you're a small organization and you have 3 very large cases that have grown over time, it's definitely going to have an impact on your mod, and you will see it. So, but the problem is what I tell people, understand the mod enough that if you're hiring onto a job and somebody wants you to reduce the mod, then that has to be a 5-year program, because the mod's the last 4 years of your data, with the most recent year being ignored. So, if that makes any sense, right? It's got to be a 5-year program. Don't expect, unless you know it really well and you know what's going to go down next year, and then I would take that job. Well, yeah, but I want a $50,000 bonus. but otherwise, I would say, hey, if you want me to change this, give me 5 years to make an impact there, and understand the rest of your, what causes development too. But so, yeah, with that, let's go into developed losses and take a look at the same data again. So now, now what does it tell us about how we're doing? Where we've got our incurred loss, and we, looks like we did a little better in 18, but 19 is starting to see an increase again. And then our frequency rate, we're actually seeing some increases year over year. So what do those charts tell us about performance? And I'll take the blame for the Slido. I think that's user error and not putting my questions in right. So I apologize to everybody for that. I don't want that to turn you off as something to use, because it's a valuable tool, but Larry obviously wasn't paying attention. So that's all. I'll take the blame for that. But yeah, go ahead, Melissa. Tell us a little bit about the concept of developed losses.
Well, and I see that Peggy has her hand up.
Yeah.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, well, maybe just an observation from your slides there. It looks like you're in trouble because your injuries are trending up, which means your cost is going to be trending up. But that was my only comment there. And thanks for calling on me.
Yeah,
Perfect.
no problem.
Perfect, Peggy.
So developed losses. This is defining in a circular form. Developed losses are losses that are developed by actuaries. So basically, actuaries look at the currently valued data. So that very first set of data that we were talking about, we apply the loss development factors that were from the arrangement of green to green data. So we're combining those 2 sets of data in order to get our developed losses. And when we say develop losses, we're developing our losses to ultimate. So what we think that value is going to be when all claims are reported, closed, everything's paid out. And like I said, for some lines of business, like workers' compensation, that could be 10, 20 years, especially if there's claims that are lifetime medical. And so it isn't as easy as just, giving it a couple years and saying, we're not going to expect anything else. So there are a lot of considerations that go into this. We use it. So my clients hire me to determine their unpaid claim liability, or in other words, what is left to be paid. So we know what's already been paid. We want to know what they have to put on their balance sheet in that liability category in order to understand what's left to be paid. And it could also be used for budgeting purposes. So in any given report, I might project for the future year and say, for let's say May 1st, 2024 to 25, this is how much loss I expect you to have. And so my clients use those numbers in a financial sense. A couple of things about this is that because it is done as a mass of data, so we're developing currently valued losses, undistinguishable from individual claims, and we are coming up with these developed losses. It may not be as useful from a safety perspective, because you can't say, oh, well, a back claim developed is this. Now, there are some programs out there that are trying to use machine learning and artificial intelligence to individually develop claims. but we got to be careful because development includes provisions for those late reported claims. So like I said, workers' compensation, a claim could happen now and we might not know about it for a few years. It provides, a provision for that $500 stub toe that turns into 50,000, any kind of additional development that was unexpected. And then in some cases, some claims tend to close and then more information is realized and then they reopen. So it's just a bulk loading of future development. And so we're not able to really separate it out into the components of, by claim. But it does provide that developed amount for any given year that I, as an actuary, will attest that I think based on my actuarial judgment and the methods we use, that that's going to be the ultimate loss amount. And if you are putting safety initiatives into place or you're updating your training or onboarding, we may start to see, just like we did in the green to green, we may start to see an improvement in those trends that could help us calculate that return on investment and look at other associated statistics with that. What do you have, Larry?
Oh, well, no, so funny story. That C-suite, creating the budget and obviously, there's some safety factor in there, right? So I don't want to tell somebody to save $100,000 next year, put aside $100,000 for work comp next year, and then it comes in and it's 500,000. The CFO, the CEO, some other people are going to be very upset, right? So wait, where are we going to come up with $400,000 to pay these claims? So Melissa's in there ahead of time trying to make a safe estimate, a safe determination based on your historical performance, all the things we know about you. We can pretty accurately predict this. And Melissa, you would admit there's a safety factor in there. We're going to put a little cushion.
I would say you get 3 actuaries in a room, you can get 5 different answers. But yeah, there is some. I mean, there's going to be a certain element of conservation built in, but it's our actuarial central estimate for the most part. It's what we believe those losses are going to be.
Like a weird, so I kind of put these two charts next to each other of currently valued versus developed, right? So same data, same information, but okay, one was currently valued on the left, the other one was developed. And that was the actuary's projection of, where this is, going to go to complete an ultimate. And the reason I bring this up, and I thought this was interesting, is 20 years ago, this is how I got in trouble. I was in a meeting and I did my portion of the presentation using data, talking about how we were doing, great and awesome. And I knew all these safety programs that were being implemented. And so, we were trending positively and I wanted to encourage the client to keep doing it. And then the actuary came behind me and said, "Hey, we're doing worse." And showed this going the other direction. And I was like, "Bah." So immediately that moment, I realized I need to go learn something about actuaries and what they're talking about. Because there was kind of a miscommunication between, even though we were on the same team, we were saying two different things. And that's that, that safety part of that too, is just that there's a lot more room for development in that most recent year. If that makes sense. We haven't seen it grow, so it has a lot more to develop into. Now, where Melissa and I talk a lot, where safety can interact with actuarial teams and C-suite, is to talk about what are programs that you're doing that may be influencing that outcome. I put to return to work or transitional duty. Are we now utilizing the state rules which allow us to direct medical care? I think of one facility I worked with in one state where there was a hospital facility and they were using their own occupational health group. And what we kind of determined was that in order to prop up their own occupational health group, they were paying max rates to their own group. So basically everyone else had fired this occupational health group, so the hospital was just using it and paying them the maximum amount. So when we would do comparisons, it was like, you guys, why are you so terrible, in your developed losses compared to everybody else? And when we changed that, there was a dramatic reduction in the actuarial, projections, because we started taking the discounts and started taking the things that we were supposed to. So, again, just understanding those two, that as a loss prevention or a safety person, talking about current valued, is your organization one where you have large deductibles, or your C-suite is having to set aside money and they're using an actuary with development? And so understanding those two different sets of numbers, and then being able to talk to the actuary about reasons why you believe we can do better, or why we're going to be doing better, and they can take that into account in adjusting, because that's money that has to be set aside. Does everybody understand that? I'm setting aside for future costs. So, that's in a low interest bearing type of account. It should be in a low risk account, so you have that money available, ready available. But that's less money for investment, right? Q&A on that. A little bit more of a difficult concept. It kind of shows us where it goes to.
Yeah, I think Nicole had a question.
Yeah, Nicole, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, I couldn't see the yellow hand. Go ahead.
That's okay. So, oh, you have to mute. Okay.
Think you're good now? I think you're muted.
Nicole, you're muted.
Still muted.
Nicole, if you want to type it into the chat, I'm happy to comment on it. I get it. I can't do my Slido questions right, so get into all the work. I get it. Any other thoughts? Well, Nicole, you back?
There. Can you hear me now?
There you go. There you go.
So a couple things that occur to me when you talk about the C-suite, because cost and safety is really just one element of performance overall for a company. So I do feel like there's some of this that it has to be taken in the context of overall performance. So even if my claim count and my incident rate is going up, but my overall company performance or productivity is not changed, then there's an element of this that I'm not going to care about, and the part that I need to care about is whether or not I care about whether or not my employees are getting hurt, right? And that's a different factor. So I'm wondering how, both from an actuarial and a safety perspective, do you run into that kind of conversation in the C-suite where, this is a sunk cost to me, and I have insurance policies that cover these things. And so is it a different conversation if I'm self-insured? Is a different conversation if, company performance appears to be staying above, the top line, or performance or productivity is staying where I need it to be? How do you approach that conversation?
Melissa,
Yeah.
you want to go first? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so there are a lot of decision points, right? Like the balance between how, what you're spending versus what you're saving in a lot of aspects of things. I mean, that's applicable in safety. For example, are you going to spend a lot of money on a safety initiative that only saves a little bit? When it comes to like management, C-suite, a lot of them are worried about the bottom line, and there's a lot that goes into that. But I've talked to my fair share of risk managers and C-suite that are also preoccupied with the safety of their employees. So one of the conversations, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, is if those changes are being made, and Larry alluded to this already, it's important that safety and actuaries have the conversation, because there could be a savings on the actuarial side if I know that something is going on. So I like to say that sometimes the qualitative information is just as important as the quantitative information. Um, in a silo, I'm looking at trends, and if I look at that developed losses and I see things increasing, I'm going to be like, things look bad. I'm not going to be very reactive to that, or I'm probably going to react more to a negative trend than to a positive trend, or a favorable trend, I should say. um and so it's very important that, for the best interest of the whole company, everybody in the company, that there are those conversations. But I notice it more so my clients have large deductibles and self-insured retentions, and because they have skin in the game and they are subject to the financial burden of those losses, and not just the financial burden of the premium that they're paying their carriers, but also the financial burden of the losses. Then there is a lot of conversation about, okay, how do I get my losses down? And then that's where those discussions could be helpful between safety and actuarial. But what do you have,
Well,
Larry?
Matt, I love your question too, in the sense that, safety is a bigger indicator, in terms of culture, management, interaction. There's a lot going on there. We also know the iceberg. Everybody's seen the iceberg, right? And the 1-to-4 ratio. And even though we're just talking about the direct cost, well, we're going to multiply that by 4 when we take a look at retention of employees and behavior and all of those pieces as well. So yeah, I mean, trying to look at all of that together. And then the other thing that we're going to talk about next is just kind of what other pinpoints do you want to add in there, where you could add cost per part. So what does this add to our budget in a cost per part, or cost per employee, or things like that? So there's a lot of people, if they compare all of their costs, sometimes they'll say, well, work comp's one of our cheapest benefits. But if we take all of the things that can tie into having accidents and injuries, then, well, it can be very expensive very quickly. Retention, getting people back on the job, all of those things. It's really, right now, what's the big driver, right? We can't find enough employees. So my greatest impact may be that I can't do the work because I don't have anybody to do the job. And I hurt the couple people who could, because, I expected them to lift 500 pounds. And so, the few people who were doing it can't do it anymore. So now what do we do? So those are things that I think we put in there. And then, and that may come into this, now, where we talk about these common actuarial other things that we can talk about. You want to talk about this graph real quick, Melissa?
Yeah, so these losses should look pretty familiar. This is a compilation of 2 graphs that we've looked at before. It's and slightly adjusted. So it's trended and developed losses. So taking into account Albert's point of, if we're just looking at the raw losses, we're just looking at developed, we're not taking into account the impacted trend. But in this case, everything is in 20x9 dollars, so that if you look at a $500,000 loss in 20x0 compared to 20x9, that's been reflected. The line graph is the claim count. And so we're just looking at, those trended and developed losses and the claim count in a similar format to what we had done on previous slides. So if you want to go ahead and progress. Now, one thing, and Albert also alluded to this in a question, if you're not normalizing the data, you're potentially hiding some important trends. And when I say normalizing the data, it's taking those losses and dividing through by some sort of exposure, or something that would indicate a propensity for loss. So workers' compensation, we tend to use payroll or headcount or hours worked. We may use mileage or units for auto, revenue for GL. And we're interested in what trends come out of that. And so there's three trends that we tend to look at as actuaries, and I know Larry looks at these as well. So frequency is going to be claim counts divided by your exposures. Severity is the average cost per claim, or that's your incurred losses, developed losses divided by your claim counts. And then loss rate is kind of the combination of those two. It's your losses divided by your exposures. And so, what really concerns us, or the reason that we want to do this, is because in order to make things even more apples to apples, we want to understand if there's been growth in the company and we see that the claim count's increasing, maybe that's not bad. Maybe the growth, the claim counts are increasing in, congruent to the growth that we're seeing in the payroll, or vice versa. Maybe payroll shrinking, and if once we divide through by that shrinking payroll, we see a completely different trend. So on the next slide, I've put together that comparison. So you could see the first graph, the blue bars are the severity. So that's that average cost per claim. And the black line is the frequency, or the claim count that has been divided through by payroll. So we're seeing the severity is increased over some of the other recent years. Frequency has been mostly flat with a slight dip in 7, but then back up again in 8 and 9. And then the second graph is going to be the just the raw losses compared to the loss rate. And the reason I put those two on the same graph is because if you're looking at the raw losses, you might look at 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and say, there's been some volatility, but it's relatively flat. It's not looking like anything I need to be concerned about. But if you're looking at that black line, which is those losses divided through by the payroll, that's a strictly increasing line. That's pretty scary story. So that's something that, would stand out to me. I would be cautious, and I would communicate this to my contact at the client, say, there's something here that we may want to pay closer attention to. So you can see the impact of dividing through by the exposures and what kind of effect that could have on the story that you're trying to tell.
So I hopefully everybody kind of gets that. I mean, rates, when we kind of conclude this and we're wrapping up, I mean, the rate is one of those most important pieces of data you can look at. Really taking yourself into comparison to how the organization is doing. How is my raw data, then taking my raw data and adding that comparison. So am I getting bigger? Do we have 500 employees, or did we shrink and now we're only 50 employees? If your loss rate is the same, that's very different between 500 versus 50 employees. So understanding that, we go back to Steve's question about EMOD, frequency and loss rates are some of those things that are used in the development of your experience modifier. So, when they're comparing you to other organizations, they're using rates as they do that comparison. So, understanding trends over time, like what Melissa said, we might use vehicle count, we might use miles driven as a way to normalize a rate and give us a little bit better information. When you look at as a manufacturer, say you could do a rate by parts or parts built. If that means more to your C-suite, and Nicole, you talked about that, are you using the language of the C-suite? What do they think is important? Well, productivity is always the big one. So you could certainly put your number counted to, hey, our accidents versus productivity or parts, made is going up or going down. And when you start doing that too, what's really interesting is Dr. Snook, many years ago proved that overtime was not worth it, because after we hit 40 hours, people's productivity just, shoots way down. So, and then my injuries go up. So now, so from an ergonomics perspective, well, hey, I'm hurting twice as many people and my productivity is going down. So how much am I paying to make a few extra parts by keeping everybody here at 50 and 60 hours a week? So, understanding those trend rates. I also I kind of put that in there, like if I'm staying flat with the same number of injuries per year, that's that 8 to 12% medical inflation would just tell me, hey, my loss rate's going to go up 8 to 12% every year. If I do nothing, it'll be 8 to 12% more expensive next year if I do nothing. So, and that doesn't take into account the million other things, your underwriters and everybody else. Retail operations, one thing I was doing with one of my clients was we looked at customer slip falls based on the number of receipts produced. So every transaction, and then we looked at how many customer slips and falls. So we could have a realistic, it wasn't fair to compare you at this location versus that location. We had to know how many customers were actually coming through. So you have a much bigger exposure, you're doing way better. Or vice versa. Because when we compare one location to another, that's usually the first thing that comes up. Well, we're twice as big as them. So of course we have, way worse losses, right? And it's like, well, let's put a rate to it and kind of figure that out. And then for those of you that do OSHA, OSHA gives you that, when you do your annual summary, OSHA, gives you the opportunity to go out and create a rate where you take 200,000 times the number of injuries, and then you divide that by your hours worked. And 200,000 is the equivalent of 100 employees working a 50-week year, is what that number is. And so that gives you a nice kind of statistic. If you say, hey, we're 2.5 is what our rate is, well, then that means that 2.5% of your employees are being injured, or 2.5 out of every 100 are being injured in this way. And you can actually go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and benchmark yourself against others that do the same thing. So head count. Now, what's interesting is sometimes I'll use head count because organizations use a head count comparison for cost of health insurance per employee. So if that's what the C-suite understands, then I'll do the same for work comp. Hey, it's $850 per employee for work comp. Is what you're paying.
I want to throw another
go
use
ahead.
case out there for headcount. So any exposure that is inflatable, so payroll inflates, revenue inflates, anything with a dollar figure, it's really hard to understand the trend that goes along with those. And so if you're trending your losses, as you should, to put everything into today's dollars, you should also be trending your exposures. But sometimes you face the problem that, say, during COVID, you gave everybody raises because they were working a lot, harder. They were, their role has changed. Well, now we're not looking at things that are consistent. And so I've had several clients that have asked me to move to headcount instead of using payroll, because it does potentially provide a little bit more of a stable viewpoint, as opposed to, I don't know, hours, average annual wage may have changed dramatically over time, but this gives us a more stable viewpoint of what that propensity for loss could be.
It's good to know. Insurance carriers a lot of times will use payroll, but if you're comparing a location to location inside your organization, would the payroll be higher at the home office? Right? And then it might all be clerical. So the home office is always doing wonderful, right? Because they have this huge payroll compared to, the folks, over in the manufacturing sector. So, headcount can be a more fair comparison. And then you can even go, what EMOD does is break out headcount payrolls by actual job classifications. So they get a little bit more sophisticated there as well. But just remember, I call it having a denominator. You want to have a denominator when you're really calculating how you're doing. So if you understand the data and then you bring in, so even that green to green, if I had a head count year over year, I could create a green to green rate for each year on how I was doing. And that gives me a little bit more insight into what's actually going on. I think answers Albert's question of bringing us closer to green in comparison. Any thoughts, questions? I know we ran over a little bit, but there was such great discussion, I think, from the panel and the board and everyone. So I don't, I didn't mind. Hopefully everyone, I saw a lot of folks hung on. So
This has been great.
any thoughts from anybody on the panel? Last second questions.
Really enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so I just as I said, I mean, my point in it and was I think it's important that loss prevention folks understand the actuarial numbers and how they're being manipulated, because you can kind of insert foot in mouth if you don't understand what they're looking at and the questions asked. And it's okay to ask questions. Obviously Melissa's very nice. And I don't think actuaries mind you asking questions. Like, I don't get it. Please tell me, what does this mean? And that can be helpful to you in being able to sell your program from a safety perspective. And an actuary may be able to help you too talk about where could you have the most impact. Where are they seeing the trends, what's impacting the cost the most? And you may find out that, well, I need a better return to work program, or I need to, go to HR and figure out how to sell these out better or something like that. Or maybe we need legal advice on how to take care of the outcomes of claims. So there's a lot of questions in there that they can get into. Melissa, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I was just gonna to wrap up a couple of thoughts and I made these comments earlier, so I'm just reiterating is that, when actuaries look at numbers, we're going off the numbers. Unless we have any outside information, if we see increasing trends, we are going to react to that. If we see decreasing trends, we may wait a little bit to react to it. So the more information that you can give us, the better the outcome will be. We'll be able to have a better understanding of what the true result will be, even if it is 10 or 20 years down the road. We'll be able to make a more informed decision. But Larry and I are both active on LinkedIn, so I'm always happy to accept new connections and accept any kind of questions that you may have. And I appreciate your time this afternoon. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much, Melissa, Larry. That was awesome presentation. Again, we'll get these out to hundreds of other people that weren't able to make it with us today, but has been great. If the panelists don't have anything else, I'm gonna hand it over to Steve. He has a few last minute words he wants to talk about.
I just wanted to jump in for a second and say, I just wanted to thank everybody, and I appreciate this. And when I reached out to you all, I've read your article and I was sitting there and I thought, well, I've done this for 30 years and I didn't know that. And so at the end of this, I have more questions, but that maybe we can get together. That aging and the workforce, the aging workforce, I talk about it all the time. I speak on it all the time. And Larry, you alluded to it. You were talking about how hard it is to get people, to in the workforce now, and these are the good times. Once one of us, a boomer, every 8 seconds reaches retirement age, and it's right now is a good time. It's a crisis 2030. So that's good. And I just wanted to reach out to some folks that we're working with. One of the things, manual material handling, we work with a company called Caster Concepts. They're phenomenal and they're doing some great things from a material handling perspective. We want to continue to work with them. And then, I wanted to plug our own software. We've developed a process for training software, Algo. And then we have a product called Atomic Ergo. And we interview people that are from all dimensions, but lots of leaders in the field, and that's it's fun. In fact, there's one Nate Schneider, he's with Red Wing. His interview was fantastic. It came out this week. If you get a chance to take a look at that. Anyway, I just want to say, and the panelists as well, Dr. Berry, appreciate you. Albert, we always, you all are always very supportive. Nicole, thank you so much. And then Ray, Ray's awful humble, but he's our mission controller because that's what he does. He's an Air Force pilot, and he's a very, very friendly. And Chris, I'm glad to finally get to meet you, and we appreciate your companies because time's money, and you all made a commitment to do this, and you're fun too. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
And here's a little rooster shoot.
Thank you for finding the picture.
Well, I hope everyone has a good weekend, and once again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everyone.
You.
Thank you so much.